New York City, 1964. On February 6, 1964, King delivered the inaugural speech of the lecture series initiated at the new school called the American Race Crisis. No audio record of his speech has been found, but in August 2013, almost 50 years later, the school discovered an audio tape with the 15 minutes of the question and answer session that followed King's address. In this remark, King referred to a conversation he had recently had with the Jawaharlal Nehru, in which he compared the sad condition of many African Americans to that of Indian untouchables. March on Washington, 1963. King's representing the SCLC was among the leaders of the Big Six civil rights organization who were instrumental in the organization of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which took place on August 28, 1963. The other leader of the organization comprising the Big Six were Roy Wilkins from the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, Whitney Young, National Urban League, Philip Radon, Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters, John Lewis, SNCC, and James L. Farmer Jr. of the Congress of the Racial Equalities. Bayard Rustin, open homosexuality, supports of the democratic socialism, and his former ties to the Communist Party USA caused many white and African American leaders to demand King distance himself from the Rustin, which King agreed to do. However, he did collaborate in the 1963 March on the Washington, for which Rustin was primary logistical and strategic organizer for King. This role was another which courted controversies, since he was one of the key figures who acceded to the wishes of the United States President John F. Kennedy in changing the focus of the march. Kennedy initially opposed the march outright because he was concerned it would negatively impact the drive for passage of the civil rights legislation. However, the organization were affirmed that the march would proceed with the march going forward. The Kennedys decided it was important to work to ensure its success. President Kennedy was concerned the turnout would be less than 100,000. Therefore, he enlisted the aid of additional church leader and Walter Reuther, president of the United States Automobile Worker, to help mobilize demonstrators for the cause. The march originally was conceived as an event to dramatize the disparate condition of the blacks in the solution US and the opportunity to place organizers' concerns and grievances squarely before the seat of power in the nation's capital. Organizers intended to denounce the federal government for its failure to safeguard the civil rights and physical safety of civil rights workers and blacks. The group acquiesced the presidential pressure and influence, and the event ultimately took on far less strident tones. As a result, some civil rights activists felt it presented an inaccurate, sanitized propaganda of a racial harmony. Malcolm X called it the Fairs of the Washington, and the Nation of Islam forbid its members from attending the march. King gave his most famous speech, "I Have a Dream," before the Lincoln Memorial during the 1963 March on Washington for the Jobs and Freedom. The march made specific demands: an end to the racial segregation in public schools, meaningfully civil rights legislation including a law prohibiting racial discrimination in employment, protection of civil rights workers from police brutality, $2 minimum wages for all workers equivalent to the $17 in 2019, and self-government for Washington, D.C., then governed by the Congressional Committee. Despite tension, the march was a resounding success. More than a quarter of the million people of diverse ethnicities attended the events, separatingly from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial onto the National Mall and around the reflecting pole. At the time, it was the largest gathering of protesters in Washington, D.C. history.